I had this friend when I was growing up that I was pretty close with. I'll call him Carl for the purpose of this story. I recall meeting him when we were in first grade. I even swear I can remember the way that the schoolroom looked and such. Carl and I became fast friends, mostly because we were completely unlike most of the other boys in the school. In particular, we both liked playing with both girls' and boys' toys for some reason. It was hard to find other boys or girls who were like this when I was younger, so it was just natural, it seemed, that he and I would become friends. Throughout the years growing up, Carl and I did just about everything together. He would always come to my birthday party as the first person to come, and be the last person to leave as well. My parents would give him a ride whenever we had one of our birthday parties, at a Showbiz Pizza or a Chuck E. Cheese. I even seem to remember having been to both of them at some point. We were a very close two-person friendship. Even when we played things like hide and seek with other kids, we still didn't connect with the other children the way that we connected with each other. As we each got around 13 years old, things began to change a little bit. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Boys going through puberty and they begin liking girls more than they like each other. But that is not what I'm talking about. Yeah, we talked about girls and certainly had an interest in girls, but there were much deeper and much stranger changes that Carl had been going through. We had both started watching horror television and horror movies when we were really young. Our parents wouldn't have been happy about it if they had known, so we really kept it a secret. Often, we would spend the night at his house in his bedroom and wait for his parents to fall asleep. Since it was a sleepover, we were always allowed to stay up pretty late. Oh, and I don't want you to think that Carl's late behavior had anything to do with watching horror movies. I truly don't believe horror movies, comics, TV shows, video games, things of that nature make people behave in a certain way. I feel like I need to get that out there before I continue. The first thing that I noticed with Carl was that he would start playing these little practical jokes on his siblings. Just some minor things, but he always got a huge kick out of it when one of them would fall for his tricks. He seemed to get a real rush out of it or something, and then he started upping the ante, so to speak. Playing little innocent practical jokes on his family developed into playing jokes on his classmates as well, but it was never like a joke you play on someone and afterwards you have a good laugh about it. Carl was not just into playing jokes, he was also into doing it without getting caught. He never wanted anyone to know that it was he who had done the deed. Here are just a few things I remember him doing. In school, we used to have these desks that you would lift the lid of the desk up, and there was this compartment inside it. He had gotten a garter snake and placed it in the desk of another student. He actually got to school very early, just so he could be the first one in the classroom, so he could leave before anyone else saw him. The student opened his desk and began yelling, causing everyone else to panic. Carl would also react in the manner that the other students did. He did this to draw attention away from himself, and it worked. No one ever suspected him of anything, and he never got in trouble for any of his pranks either. You name it. Tacks on the teacher's chair, stealing her attendance book. He once rubbed the inside of every pair of his older brother's underwear with icy hot before letting them dry and putting them back in his drawer. Just a lot of things like that. I thought that it had reached his apex though, when in between classes once in a crowded staircase, he tripped a kid who fell down the stairs and broke his arm. This was in high school, and the kid was a jock, who pretty much lost his ability to play football after that. But it was when Carl was 16 that things took a turn that I could have never seen coming. We were still old enough to go trick-or-treating in my area, and personally I had stopped going when I was 12. I just felt a bit weird walking around and begging for candy at that age. Carl had stopped too, but it wasn't unusual to see teenagers up to 18 still going around asking for candy. At age 16 though, Carl wanted to go trick-or-treating. He insisted that I get a costume and go along with him as well. I really didn't want to. I mean, for one thing, I knew the guy, and if he suddenly wanted to do this again after 4 years, he had to have a reason for it, and that reason was most likely not a good one. Still, the guy was my friend. I got myself a costume. He insisted that it was a costume in which no one would be able to tell who we were. I went as Freddy Krueger and bought myself a high-end rubber mask. Carl's costume was even more concealing. He actually wore boots with lifts in them to make himself look taller. He wore a Michael Myers-like outfit with some sort of welder's mask that covered his entire head. It was a weird costume, but it definitely hid who he was. I was wondering why he wanted to wear such an odd costume. When he told me why, I literally shivered. A chill went down my spine. Carl had recently heard about the case of the man who had killed his own son with a poisoned pixie stick. I mean, back then, we all believed that people put things into candy, and that it was always a smart thing to check all of the candy before eating it, but other than that one case, you really never heard anything on the news about it. You never heard about any candy with a razor blade in it or anything like that. Carl wanted to change that though. He had taken some Tootsie Rolls and inserted long thin pins into them longwise. He then had them wrapped back up like they had never been opened. He was planning on putting them into a bucket and handing them out to small children while we were trick-or-treating. I told Carl that was a crazy idea that could get some kid killed. His excuse was that no parent would let their children eat Halloween candy without checking it first. Not only was the wrapper twisted back on in a terrible fashion, the head of the pin was obvious sticking out of the end of the Tootsie Roll. I really didn't understand the point if he had supposedly made it so obvious. He simply said he wanted to scare the parents and kids into thinking someone wanted to hurt them, but he was sure no one would actually get hurt. It was the most insane thing I had ever heard a person tell me in my entire life. I mean, not only was the premise of his plan sickening beyond all measure, it wasn't foolproof either. All it took was a single parent not checking one piece of candy, and Carl might be a murderer. The two of us argued heavily about it, and he was pretty angry at me for not wanting to go along with it. It was only that when I told him that if he did, I would have to reveal him as the person who had done it, that he finally decided not to. We decided to just remain in and watch movies that night. You may be wondering why I didn't just leave. Honestly, I felt that if I did, Carl would go and do the plan anyway on his own. I just couldn't take the chance that he would risk a child's life like that. Others may be wondering why I didn't call the police. Well, he backed off and wasn't going to do it. Even though he had done some amazingly bad things in recent years, I still wanted to believe him when he told me he wouldn't do it. The strangest thing is that Carl never seemed to have any resentment toward me about thwarting him. He continued to just treat me exactly like he had treated me before this had ever happened. I had a hard time seeing him the same way after though, and although we continued to hang out until we graduated high school, I didn't keep in touch with him after we went away for college. I have absolutely no idea whatever happened to him. I just hope he never did anything this bad to anyone in real life. When I got too old to go for tricks or treats anymore, I began trying to find other ways to get scared. There are a bunch of different things I did on Halloween, but I think my favorite thing was to walk through the graveyard. It took a little bit of nerve to do it the first time, and yes, it was very frightening as well. I was scared to death by any little sound I heard. But of course, which is always the case when it comes to scary things, the fear eventually wore off when I realized there was no danger. This was about 20 years ago. It was Halloween night and I was 17 years old. I was talking with a friend on the phone, a friend who agreed to accompany me and hang out in the graveyard at night. Don't get me wrong, we didn't just walk through there and that was it. We'd often find a nice and dark, quiet place to sit down, and we would just talk for a while. Sometimes it was also fun to just walk up and down the paths the whole time. There would occasionally be other teenagers in the graveyard too, which often made it a lot less scary. My friend's name was Josh, and we met up and walked down to the graveyard. The streets were already full of children in their costumes, trick-or-treating, and there were plenty of adults around trying to scare them as well. We walked down the street and then down a couple of others until we were moving off into the dark. One of the things I liked so much about the graveyard was the complete darkness of it all. When you first entered it at night, you couldn't see anything, but then your eyes would slowly begin adjusting to the light. You would be able to see shadows and things like that. Pretty soon you would be able to see the path better, and to see the tombstones better too. And although you would soon get used to the ambient lighting, you never got completely seeable. Things could still surprise you. Josh and I steered clear of a group of teenagers who were sitting around a monument and drinking. You'll think I'm lame for this, but I never even had my first drink until I was in my mid-20s. We just wanted to get around to the darker and scarier part of the graveyard. I'm not sure how long we had been walking around before I first saw the scariest thing I had ever seen in my life. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe something like the wind blowing the branches of a tree around or something. I wasn't quite sure. "Hey, Josh," I whispered. "Did you see something over there?" Josh elbowed me. "Yeah, man, try that scare me on Halloween crap," he laughed. He then looked over to where I had been pointing. Josh jumped, and I felt him grab tightly onto my shoulder. "Damn, you're right," he suddenly whispered. "There is someone over there." We both kept looking in that direction, and we were both trying to be as quiet as we could while we watched this person. We weren't sure what it was about them, but we could just barely make them out. It was like they had dressed in all black or something, and made it much more difficult to see than anyone else had been. "Holy fuck," Josh said to me with a hint of a laugh in his voice. "That's the frickin' Grim Reaper." We followed after the figure. After he had given me a pretty good idea of what I was supposed to be looking at, I was finally able to make out the form. Yeah, there was someone in the graveyard dressed like the Grim Reaper on Halloween night. "Hey, let's follow him," Josh suggested. "Nah, I'm not interested," I protested. I was not really afraid of anything, but I really didn't feel like bugging a random person, especially someone who would dress up as a Grim Reaper and hang out in the graveyard on Halloween night. Anyway, Josh wasn't willing to sit around and wait for me. He got up and followed the person dressed as the Reaper. He found the whole thing intensely amusing, I guess, and wanted to see what was going on. The direction he was walking in was back towards those teenagers we had seen hanging out. After a few moments, I got up and followed after him. The closer I got to the area where the teenagers were, I began to make out more and more some frantic cries, and when I got closer, I noticed something immediately was wrong. The guy in the costume was nowhere to be found. Josh was standing there with a shocked look on his face, and one of the teenagers was giving CPR to another one. Now I know what you're thinking. You think I believe that Grim Reaper was the real Grim Reaper and one of those teenagers died or something. You know, for a second I almost believed that. I mean, the whole thing was just very, very creepy. But when my eyes readjusted a little bit, I noticed the Reaper costume laying on the ground beside the boy getting CPR. The teenagers had seen us pass by earlier and thought they would play a prank on us. One had been dressed as the Reaper and was following us, trying to scare us. When he got back to his circle of friends, he had some sort of heart attack or something, whatever it was, and I don't know what it was. Thankfully, it didn't kill him though. Although Josh and I didn't really know the group, we did see the one dressed as the Reaper at school later that year. It's one of those things that's really scary in the moment. The very idea of the existence of the Grim Reaper is silly, but with everything that happened that night, it just seemed really weird and freaky at the time. Josh had seen the guy take the costume off, but because I had only followed from behind, to me it had actually seemed like the person in the costume had disappeared, and the kid was just suddenly dying. I had a pretty scary experience when I was a child, and I was out on trick-or-treat night. I was 11 years old at the time. My dad was enlisted in the Navy. We always lived on naval housing, usually in the poorer neighborhoods, but I actually remember most of that fondly. One of the reasons being that people seemed to decorate better for the holidays when they were poorer. Trick-or-treating was always done on Halloween on the time. None of this doing it on a weekend day because the problem of being a school night, and we always began trick-or-treating around the time the sun began to set. I suppose that being on the naval base, it was automatically much safer than most other places. I was a thin, kinda nerdy kid, and I also tended to get bullied a little bit in school, but I did have my friends, and we all decided to go out together. We didn't go out with our parents, though. they decided to stay home and hand out candy. Like I mentioned, because it was a naval base, we all felt rather safe with the situation, so this was the way we went about it. Of course, being quite a nerdy kid, all of my friends were as well, and we had the same bullies bullying us all around. We also knew where they lived though, and we did our best to avoid them as much as possible. On this particular Halloween, we had been out for over an hour or so walking all over the neighborhood. I never see people trick-or-treating like that anywhere nowadays, not with the sheer and vast number of children out after dark. We were getting into a part of the neighborhood that we weren't the most familiar with. After a bit, we slipped out of the naval housing and were suddenly on a regular neighborhood street. We weren't supposed to do that, but we were on a quest for more candy. We came upon this area where there didn't seem to be as many kids as the other places. When we did, we noticed that there were a group of kids, maybe a year or two older than us, hanging out on the front lawn of this house. We tried to avoid them, especially when we recognized them as kids from school. They weren't bullies or anything like that, but we knew who they were and we didn't really want to have much to do with them. One of the boys recognized me though, and yelled out to me to come over there. I hesitated. I really didn't want to be anywhere near them. However, they kept calling, and we realized it might just be better to go over and see what they wanted than to ignore them. They weren't bullies, but that doesn't mean they couldn't become them if they were angry at us for ignoring them. We walked up to them and asked what was going on. They told us that the house they were looking at was haunted by a demon because a guy who used to live there was possessed and murdered his family or something. They dared me to go up and see it. I wanted nothing to do with it though, and told the boys I didn't want to. I was prepared to walk away with my friends. However, before I could, one of the other boys grabbed me and began pushing me up to the door of the house. I was terrified and began screaming for help, but the group of older kids intimidated my friends from helping me. He was pushing me up towards the house as quickly as he could. He was telling me things like the demon was going to drag me into hell with him, and things like that. And then he suddenly let go of me. Since I was pressing back against him, I immediately fell backwards, but when I got up and looked around, all of the boys, both my friends and his, were running off into the distance. I turned and looked at the house, and saw someone standing in the doorframe. My first impulse was that it was the demon, and I needed to get up and run. "Damn kids, stop fucking around on my lawn," I heard the old man yell in the doorway. "I don't have any damn candy, that's why I keep the lights out." I wasn't scared of the possible demon or anything, but I was scared of a pissed-off senior citizen. I told my friends about the old man and the misunderstanding, but I never told any of the older kids. Just let them think it was a demon for what they did. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of daily upload thing. I'm trying to upload as much as possible while I still have the time to, mostly because I find it fun and there's not much else to do while COVID is around, so I hope you guys are enjoying that. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. These stories were all submitted to me through my email by subscribers. If you guys would also like to submit stories for me to read in the video, please be sure to take a look in the description below. It will have links to all my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, so I can make it a nice, healthy, long video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, make sure you use proper grammar and spatial paragraphs and all that stuff, because it's kind of hard to read wall of text submissions. If you guys are new to the channel and you like this, I have two other channels, one where I do disaster documentaries, and another one where I do true crime videos. I do both of those once a week. You'll find links to those in the description as well. Those are called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, respectively. Special thanks to my artist. His links to his social media will be in the description below. He does all of my artwork for this channel, and he does the thumbnails as well. if you like his art, so you can check his social media out, and he'll be able to get you something real cool if you're in the mood for that. If you guys are curious about the music, it's listed in the description below in the order which it appears with links to the artists. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.